name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Last week I was reading a book about a woman film director who was trained in, coming from the South, Arizona I think, and then getting her training in film direction in New York City. And what a struggle it was for her to do that, to find the money to do it, and she lived in very difficult circumstances in a small apartment and struggled to pay for the fees as she went through her school at New York University. And eventually she had to delay the program to some degree because she had to work while she was doing it, but eventually she made it through. And the story went on that even though she was a class medalist, the leading student in her class, that she couldn't find work as a film director, that there was a lot of prejudice, that those positions were reserved or taken for granted, that they went to male men. And so while they got positions with CBS and the other companies, she couldn't, and she was offered jobs, for example, of being a secretary, and that maybe in many years' time she might get a chance to do her own film direction. But she never gave up her dream and wouldn't kind of negotiate for what her dream was. That she felt that was her calling, to do that particular work, and even if she had to wait till she was 50 years old, one day she would direct her movie. And when she got to direct her movie, that would be a movie to remember. Well, the book ends without her actually having reached 50 years old or directing her movie, but it struck me in thinking about what we have this evening with the birth of Jesus Christ to Mary, Saint Mary, just how Saint Mary is remarkable for her strength. As quiet as she is, she isn't given much of a speaking role in the New Testament, although what she is given is significant with the Magnificat, for example, the first miracle of Christ. Still, there is such a great strength in Saint Mary. And thinking about that of course is prophesied in Isaiah, not precisely in this reading we have tonight, that a child will be born of a young woman, it says in Isaiah, and the mystery, in a sense, of Hebrew prophecy. One of the things that's notable, probably not always true, but true most of the time, is that with Hebrew prophecy that we have in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Scriptures, you didn't just get to make a prophetic statement and it was automatically included in the Hebrew Scriptures. Not that way. With the Hebrew prophets, your prophecy had to already be shown to be true before it would be taken into the Hebrew Scriptures. So it's not just science fiction and so on that appears in the Hebrew Scriptures. This has to be true already. So when the prophet Isaiah says, "From this young woman there will come this divine child," it's referring to something that already would have taken place in the first place. And who would that be? Who would that young woman be? And the young woman would probably, the scholars would say of here in Isaiah, that would probably be referring to the wife of the prophet himself, who would have that child. But then another very significant thing about Hebrew prophecy is that when the thing is prophesied, then it tends to keep happening in Jewish life. So it would have had an immediate reference, the coming of a child to this woman, but then it would also have a future reference coming in future. So it's not only the prophet's wife there who would have the child, but then we take it to come again in the life of Jesus Christ. And then, of course, we see in the life of Jesus Christ the Son of God, as it says here, the Almighty Father, the Prince of Peace. We see him as this divine child born of this Virgin Mary. But in thinking about the Virgin Mary and the birth of Jesus Christ to her, this is where the story about this young woman, movie director in New York, comes in. Because if a woman in New York is still suffering that amount of prejudice against her in her field, how much more prejudice would St. Mary be dealing with? And yet it is her tremendous inner strength. It is no wonder that we look to her as the leading Christian, because her tremendous inner strength that enables her to go through with what the angel says to her, go through her whole life, go through that refugee period in her life, and then continue at the cross, then continue with St. John over to Ephesus. And why I think that's really important and wonderful to remember tonight in Jesus Christ being born to St. Mary is that in some way, yes, we see him as divine, but in some way, that mother of his had some kind of a stamp on his life. Of course, we never know exactly what it was, but somehow in the life of St. Mary, her faith, her strength, her focus would have been part of the stamp of the spirituality of Jesus Christ himself. So on this night, like Easter, it's hard to speak about these things because they're mysteries. We don't know exactly how it would be that God was conceived in that virgin's womb. At which point did Jesus Christ know that he had this divine calling? But one of the things we do know is that his mother had a part to play in it. And I think so it was of the prophet's wife in Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah. It's of St. Mary in the time of St. Mary. And I think it's true of us here tonight that God is present with us in the Holy Spirit, in our turning to Christ and our giving our life to him in faith. But there's some part of it which, like St. Mary, some part of it in which there's a human stamp, that God works with our own life, works with our own calling, and that one day our own calling will emerge and become true. So as we gather tonight at this altar, let us open our hearts to that mystery. Let's let God speak to us. Let's let God somehow step into our own circumstances, even if there's oppression, even if there is difficulties that we're facing, that somehow that miracle will happen in our own lives also. In the name of Christ, amen. Amen.